I don't know what I say. It's the most famous. Yeah, I would say maybe it's one of the most famous stories, is how Yaakov works very hard for his wife, for Rachel. And the pasuk tells us in Perek Chavtet, pasuk Chavhei. So it's chapter 29, verse 25, Chavtet Chavhei. In these chumashim, it's on page 150. And here we see Perek Chavtet, pasuk Chavhei. Vayihi baboker, and it was in the morning. Vihine he leah, right? Yaakov thinks he married Rachel, but he wakes up in the morning and sees vihine. That's a word of surprise. He leah. Oh, it's not who I thought it was going to be. Vayomer alavan, and then he goes to his father-in-law and says, "What did you do? Like, how could you have done this to me? Hello, berachel avadati imach. Like, I worked for a specific daughter of yours. Her name was Rachel. V'lama rimisani, and why did you trick me?" So we're gonna. The tricking is relevant, but we're going to take a look at a very fascinating midrash, maybe known to some, maybe not to others. But this midrash really is going to give us some insight into the inner workings of a Yaakov. And I think will help us. It's a good lens to have as we follow Yaakov throughout his many interactions that he has with people over the next few parshiot and over the next many years of his life. Because as we know, we're going to follow Yaakov really all the way until the end almost of Sefer Breshit. So the Medrash says something fascinating. It says that, what does that mean? Vihine hi le'ah. He wakes up, and what happened the whole night before? So the Midrash tells us that the whole wedding night, he called Rachel, he used her name, and she answered. The next day, when he discovered, right, meaning, okay, so one Midrash says that Rachel was actually there, and it was her voice that he was hearing, and that's why he was so confused. Another Midrash doesn't address that piece, but just says, Yaakov says to Leah, never mind, your father tricked me. How could you have tricked me like this? And she says to him, what do you mean? I learned from the best. He said, but I called Rachel, and and you answered as though you were her. And she said, I learned from the best. My father gave me instructions, and your mother gave you instructions. What happened in last week's Parsha when Rivka said to her son, it's time, you have to take the bracha, right? It's yours, go grab it. She dressed him up as his brother, and he goes into his father's tent, and Yitzchak is sure that something is up. He pets him. He says, welcome, welcome. He pets him, and he says, like, you feel like Esav, but you sound like Yaakov. He called Esav, and you, Yaakov, you answered on behalf of your brother. So what do you mean? How could I have answered as my sister? You and I were like the perfect shidduch. I messed around, you messed around. I followed what my parents told me. You followed what your parents told you. Like, what's the problem here? I learned from you. The commentary on the Midrash, points out that there is a lot of complicated family dynamics here, clearly. But more than that, you see, like, Yaakov followed his mother, Rivka. Leah followed her father, Lavan, and they were siblings. So you kind of can't ignore the fact that there is a certain thread, a certain type of behavior that is coming from the family of Betuel, the family of Rivka, and the family of Lavan. It manifested itself in two different areas where Yaakov goes and tricks his father, and now he's tricked by his wife in the name of her father. But we know that things work out the way they're supposed to, right? If ever there was a decision that somebody would make, like a Yaakov Avinu, if it wasn't justified, we've seen the commentaries will tell us, like, oh, no, that wasn't good. That wasn't a good thing to do. Don't be like Yaakov in all ways except for this. They're not shy. The Gemara is not even shy to tell us when there's a mistake. And yet the Gemara and the Midrashim, Chazal, they go to great lengths to tell us that what Yaakov did was not wrong. And whether it's because you're supposed to listen to your mother, or it's because he knew Beruach HaKodesh, he knew divinely inspired that he was meant to have the blessing that was going to be given to Esav. And I'm leaving out all the commentary and complicated discussion about that. But the bottom line is, if this was something that was really wrong, we would have been told it was really wrong. And yet here you see Leah's like throwing it back in Yaakov's face. right? And it's not just here that Chazal want us to see that Yaakov is going to pay a price for his trickery, right? Even though they don't tell us that he did anything wrong, but they're giving us a message, like a little bit under the radar, giving us this message through this midrash that Yaakov was really the one who caused his own being tricked in his marriage. In other words, just like he tricked his father, now he's being tricked by his wife. Like, you kind of brought this on yourself. That's a little bit the message that Leah is giving him. And if we look more carefully at this week's Parsha, so if we're going to go backwards a little bit, because this really has the same flavor, the same echo as what we had just seen. If we look in Perek Chaf Perek Chaf actually, before we get to Yud Aleph, I just want to read with you Pasuk Yud, because I think it's fascinating. The things you notice when you pick apart the Parsha, word by word and pasuk by pasuk. So this is page 148, the 29th parak, and the 10th pasuk. Yaakov has come to the well. He's run away from his parents' house because Rivka said, he's going to kill you, your brother, get out of here. He runs. He already had the dream on the mountaintop with the ladder. That already happened. And now he finally sees this well in the distance. He meets up with these shepherds, and he is able somehow, with like superhuman ability, to remove a rock that normally it takes many, many groups of shepherds to remove. He's able to remove it himself. And he's able to give the flock of Rachel to drink. Pasuk Yud tells us, Vayhi kasher ra'a Yaakov, and it was when Yaakov saw et Rachel bat Lavan, Rachel, the daughter of Lavan, Achi imo, who was the brother of his mother, ve'et son, and the sheep, Lavan, Achi imo, of Lavan, his mother's brother, in case we didn't catch it the first time. Vayigash Yaakov, so Yaakov comes close. Vayagel ta'even, here he removes this massive stone, me'al piha be'er, from on top of the well. Vayashk et son, he gives water to the sheep. Lavan, achi imo, to Lavan, his uncle, his mother's brother. Now, if it would have been 2 times, it'd be like, okay, but 3 times in the same pasuk, you have to tell me who the sheep belong to, who the girl belongs to. Like, I get it. Your mother and Lavan are brother and sister. Like, so I think there's probably a lot to be taken from this, but I read something from Rav Hirsch that just like, it triggered something in my mind, that I was thinking for the first time of Yaakov as, granted, a grown man, but Yaakov, who had to leave his home very unceremoniously, right? He had this big event where he got this bracha from his brother, and then the next thing he knew, his whole life unraveled, right? He didn't have a proper send-off. He literally went with what he had on his back and whatever his mother was able to pack for him in his knapsack. And unfortunately, like so many other Jews in generations past, was forced to run out, essentially like in the middle of the night, undercover with nothing, right? We know from the Midrash that we're going to get to in a minute that he had some items, but it was only what he could carry, right? Like, how much can you take if it's just you? And you've got to move quickly because Esav has in mind to kill him. So he's running. He has a tremendous amount of stress and pain and pressure, because not only did he just say goodbye to his parents, and who knows when he's going to be able to see them again, he had one brother, he had one sibling, a twin. And granted, things between them are not so simple, but did he really intend for their relationship to end like this? Like, was that something that he had processed? We don't know. Sorry, I'm looking for a tissue so my nose doesn't start running in front of all of you. I'm just going to grab a napkin. So for the first time, I started thinking of Yaakov as this man who had no resolution about leaving his original nuclear family. Like, he just was a man on the run. He knew he was going towards family, but who knows? The Torah is not so specific about how long it took. And yeah, maybe it happened faster than it should have. Maybe, as Chazal tell us, he had kfitzat haderach. He moved faster than would be expected. You know, like he sped the whole way there instead of just part of the way. But whatever the background is, he has been walking around now for however many days this has been with this feeling of like, I'm alone in this world. I have no family. Really, again, like so many of the stories, unfortunately, that we hear about are some of us parents, grandparents, great-grandparents who left with nothing, didn't know if they would ever see their family again. Like, it just, for whatever reason, in my head, when I read what Rav Hirsch had to say, when he points out that it repeats this idea, his mother's brother, what is Yaakov thinking this whole time? Like, my mother, my father, my parents, I have nobody, I'm alone. And so then you sort of, when you think about that, that's where his mind was. I just want a family. Like, I just want to feel like I have a home. When he sees Rachel in Pasuk Yud Aleph, right? And it's interesting. You'll notice the language. It says, Vayashk etzon lavyan achi imo. He gives to drink, right? And then what's the next pasuk? How it begins? Vayishak. It's the same shoresh, but it's different conjugation. So that it was, he gave to drink, and also vayishak, he kisses. So that's not an accident. The nishika and the lehashik, to give water, like to give sustenance to somebody, which tells us, I think, a lot about what a kiss can do for a person. And I think there's reason to read this as being very not romantic. That's what Rav Hirsch's point. Rav Hirsch's point was, you know why it keeps telling you that it's his mother's brother's daughter? Because that's what he's thinking. He's thinking my original family, my home. He's not thinking romance. She's beautiful. I got to have her. I can't keep my hands off of her. This is a man who was desperately lonely, had no family, didn't know when he would be able to reconnect with them. And now he sees like blood relative, somebody who he understands. It's like someone from my hometown, like all those stories that we hear. I was mentioned, I think, to some of you that I've been listening to this Meaningful People podcast. So they interviewed a Holocaust survivor and how he describes being reunited with siblings. He was incredibly blessed. Unfortunately, he lost, I think, one sibling, but he had 8 surviving siblings from the war. I mean, it's like, it's just an unbelievable, but the story he tells of coming back home and reuniting with his siblings for the first time, this is Yaakov. This is the closest landsman that Yaakov was going to find. And that's where that kiss comes from. Vayishak Yaakov LaRachel, so he kisses Rachel. Vayisa et kolo vayefk. And it's this phrase that I really want to focus on. Vayisa et kolo, he raises his voice, vayefk, and he cries. Okay, so maybe this added piece makes everyone feel like, oh, so emotional. He was in love with her, and like he had this burst of emotion. I think if you read it with the eyes of Rav Hirsch, which is that this was him finally, after all this time of not knowing if he would find family or be with another person, that he could feel close and safe with, here he found family. And we all know sometimes, like I find this happens with children. It happens with me also. You come home from a long day and you manage to keep everything bottled up inside the whole day. And then you see the one person that you feel safe and comfortable with, and like all comes out, right? That's what happens with Yaakov. He sees Rachel and he starts crying. That's one explanation. Right. And I think when we read that, we can all sort of see ourselves in different times and stages of our life where we have felt this like total being so overwhelmed by something. I've kept it in for so long, and then it releases. But Chazal, the sages, really want us, I think, to get a different message. And I saw this in an article by Rabbi Geffen. His stuff is on aish.com if any of you are interested in reading. So Rabbi Geffen points out, this I had seen in a number of places, but I'll share with you what Rabbi Geffen said that is quite brilliant. That this phrase is very familiar. Vayisa et kolo vayef. He raised his voice and he cried. Like, well, what does that remind me of? So if you go back to last week's Parsha and the episode where Yaakov has taken the bracha, stolen the bracha from his brother, and he is no longer in the tent, and Esav comes in with food, all excited to get the bracha from his father. Dad, I'm here. I brought you everything you like. I made it just the way you want. Now, please bless me. And the pasuk tells us that Yitzchak had a charada gedola. He was shaking because he realized what had happened. And what is Esav's response? He's also mad. But the pasuk also tells us, Vayisa et kolo vayefk. He raised his voice and he cried. It's the exact same language as what's written here with Yaakov when he sees Rachel. Never an accident when that happens. So that the Torah did that for us, that Hashem put those words in the Torah here. What is that trying to tell us? So there's a very famous Rashi here. Rashi says, why did Yaakov cry? And these are like some of the stories that you hear from children. And it's important to relook at some of these midrashim through adult eyes. Why did he cry? Oh, he cried because he saw Beruach HaKodesh. He had some sort of nevuah, some kind of divine inspiration that he and Rachel would not be buried next to each other, that she was going to be in one place and he would be laid to his eternal rest with someone else, Leah. I don't know if he knew, whatever, but that they weren't going to be together forever, so to speak. And that was very painful. Like, I'm never going to we're not going to have that eternity together. Second explanation that Rashi brings, also based on a midrash, is that Yaakov, when he sees Rachel and he realizes like family, finally found family, and maybe at some point his mind starts to go towards building his own family, he looks at himself, says the Medrash, and he's empty-handed. And he knows from all the family stories what happened when his father's servant came and tried to get a wife for him, right? Eliezer showed up, like literally chock full of everything, jewelry and money and camels and like it was a big parade when Eliezer came to town. And here's Yaakov. He's this Nebuch refugee. He's got nothing but the shirt on his back. He's got nothing. And the Medrash tells us, you know why that is, by the way. And this is the story that I think a lot of kids have heard. The story is that even though Esav says out loud, when my father dies, I'm going to kill my brother Yaakov, he actually immediately dispatches his son Eliphaz and tells Eliphaz, you don't come back here without my brother's head, essentially. Like, you kill my brother, you make sure he doesn't see the light of day. And so he sends Eliphaz after Yaakov, he catches up to Yaakov, and he's ready to kill him. But he looks at him, it's like, this is my uncle Yaakov. You look just like, okay, you don't look just like my dad, but you and my dad, you're twins. Like, I grew up around Uncle Yaakov. My father wants me to kill you. Like, you have all these examples in Bereshis where a parent tells a child to do something and it like doesn't sit well. It happens so often. It's fascinating. And Eliphaz doesn't know what to do with himself. And Yaakov doesn't want to die. And he sees Eliphaz is hesitating and he has like an opening. So like any good Jewish survivor, like every survivor has a story like this, right? Where they somehow talk their way out of this terrible situation that they're in. I know in our family, we have quite a few of those stories. We're so blessed. The quick thinking, like people, we don't even know where they got it from. We get it from Yaakov. Yaakov says to him, Eliphaz, you don't want to kill me, but I know you have to listen to your father. You have to obey your father. That's what we do. We listen to our parents. So what I want you to do is take everything I have with me. Leave me with the clothing on my body, take everything else, all my money, all my possessions, everything, it's yours, because then I'll be like a dead person. It'll be like you left me dead on the side of the road because I don't have anything. And of course, there's a whole discussion on what that means, that a person with no belongings, no possessions is considered as though they're not living. But okay, he convinces him so that by the time, the Medrash tells us, by the time he shows up and sees Rachel, guy's probably starving. He's got nothing. He is so grateful to find her, but he's empty-handed and he's humiliated. Like, it feels awful. Here's this woman, I want to impress her. I want to either, join her family or have her help me build my family, and I've got nothing, and he feels horrible. And this, the Medrash basically is letting us know that Yaakov is suffering. He's suffering at the thought that his marriage to Rachel is not eternal somehow. Something about their relationship is never going to be perfect or complete. Almost like a premonition that the whole Leah thing is going to happen, but something is going to get in the way of this perfect union. And then also in the here and the now, he's suffering. So Rabbi Geffen asked this question, like, if it's really true that everything Yaakov did was okay in the mind of God, like in the court of heaven, they look at him and say, listen, he did it all for the right reasons. His mother told him to do it. He's supposed to carry the blessing of his father, Yitzchak. Like, we can't fault the guy. But if that's true, then why does he suffer so much? In Yaakov's life, more than any other person, I think he and David HaMelech are they're in competition for who suffers more, with Eov. So complicated, Yaakov's life. And what we're going to see in the next few weeks, hopefully I'll remember that this is what I want to talk about, is that this thread of suffering from decisions that he has made and actions that he's taken, they follow Yaakov through his whole life. There are certain things that he does, and we can explain it away and say that it's fine, but he suffers the consequences from it. So Rabbi Geffen quotes the Nitziv, and I didn't see the Nitziv inside, but I'm going to look for it. He quotes the Nitziv, who tries to address this question, right? How could it be that Yaakov did something for the sake of heaven? He did something for all the right reasons, and he's suffering. He suffers in his relationship with his wife. He suffers like in this world, in the next world. And it's almost like the marriage between the trickery and the marriage between him and Leah is also a result, as that initial Rashi had told us, right? Also a result of his tricking. So like what's happening? So the Nitziv explains, and this is so brilliant. Not that the Nitziv needs me to call him brilliant. It's brilliant. But the Nitziv explains that when Yaakov took the bracha from his father, he didn't just cause Esav a lot of pain. He also caused Yitzchak pain. The pasuk told us he had a charadag, he was like shaking. But when he harmed his father, he felt horrible about it. Like, that didn't sit well with him. Yaakov got no pleasure, zero, the opposite. He was pained by the fact that he had to trick his father. He was nauseous about it, but he knew it was something he had to do, so he did it anyway. But when it came to the tricking of his brother Esav, And Esav was suffering and suffering deeply, right? Vayisat kolo vayef. He's suffering so badly, he wants to kill his own brother, right? And for whatever we want to say about Esav and his midos, maybe he wasn't the kindest, softest, gentlest soul, but you made him so mad, he wants to kill you. Like you did something significant, you wounded him. And the Netziv says, if Yaakov continues to suffer from that action, it must be that there was a small, very human part of him that took a drop of pleasure from the pain that he caused his brother Esav. Because clearly with his father, there was none. And the Torah and Chazal give us no indication that he ever had any consequences from hurting his father. But from hurting his brother, it literally haunts him day and night, and it haunts us. Right? The Medrash tells us that when Mordechai is shaking and trembling in the street after the gezerah, the edict of Haman to destroy the Jewish people, that it uses the same language, the charada gedola, that we saw with Yitzchak and with Esav. And the Medrash tells what's going on there? Well, yeah, it's because back in the day, way back, Yaakov had a little bit of pleasure. And because of that, the descendant of Esav is going to continue to torture the Jewish people generation after generation. So it comes out very prominently in the story of Purim with Mordechai, but it comes out very prominently in the life of Yaakov himself. And what does this have to do with us? Because this is not something, we don't see this in our daily lives, although maybe if we read the news more carefully and we see some of the events of our day, current events, anti-Semitism and all of that, we could certainly attribute some of that. But I think what's important and what Rabbi Geffen pointed out in his article is that there are a lot of times in our daily lives where we have to do things that we don't feel great about, but we know it's the right thing. For example, this happens in our house. Somebody calls and asks for a personal reference for someone, a recommendation, whether it's for business something or to move to a community, to join a practice, for a shidduch, right? And they are asking you questions about what's really going on here. And Baruch Hashem, 99.9% of the time, I only have amazing things to say, but every once in a while, somebody calls and you have something that you need to share, because you have an obligation to protect someone from getting hurt, right? We're not allowed to stand by. Lo tamod al dam reyacha. Can't stand by and let somebody get physically, financially, emotionally harmed if you know for sure this is going to cause a problem. And so when those things happen, when we have to do things, we have to say things, we have to share information, or perhaps we have to discipline a child or call out a relative who's done something that has been hurtful or wasn't okay, or they, violated some family standard or something, right? Never mind all of the halachic implications of, how we're supposed to actually share rebuke with each other when somebody is sort of going in the wrong direction. And that's very delicate and very complicated. But the way that this is so relevant is that when those things happen, we absolutely have to do it. Yaakov had to take the bracha, it seems. And yet we have to be so self-aware and so attuned to whether it's kind of fun that I have this piece of information that I could now share you, right? Feels kind of good that you came to me to ask me for this information. And I know the real story, right? And I'm just being very open, and that is so human. People like to one-up each other, and people like to feel that they are powerful or have some kind of control. And that is the last thing that we want a person to be experiencing or feeling when they're in a situation like this. We want to feel the way Yaakov did about his father Yitzchak. Oh my gosh, I cannot believe I have to do this to my father. I'm sick about it. I'm sick that I have to share this piece of information about somebody. I'm sick that I have to take care of this business dealing or this conversation in this way. And I know I'm probably going to hurt someone's feelings. I can't believe I have to do this, but this is my obligation and this is what I have to do. And it's just a reminder every week when we read the story of Yaakov's life, and he gets tricked over and over and over again. He gets tricked by his father-in-law. That's nothing. He gets tricked by his own wives. He gets tricked by more than once. He gets tricked by his children, right? When in the sending away of Yosef, the semi-murder or whatever we want, right? Over and over and over again. And it keeps happening. You would think Yosef gets sent to Mitzrayim, that's bad enough. No, even once Yosef is in Mitzrayim with the thing with Binyamin, and it doesn't stop.
It's a reflection of what he did. what he did, so he has to live with it.
100%. But in other words, what we want to learn from that is that's absolutely what it is. It's like this, we set patterns up that we don't intend. And the consequences, we would still not say that Yaakov did the wrong thing, right? He followed whatever rules God had given, he followed them. He did what his mother told him. That's always a good thing. Always listen to your mother, right? And yet he pays a heavy price for it. And so the Netziv is helping us understand that sometimes you have to do hard things. Sometimes you have to hurt someone's feelings, and sometimes you have to go about doing something and it's not nice. But sometimes the not nice thing is actually the right thing, because it's actually being nice, where people will say like, no, if you say yes to this, you're really saying no to all those other things. Like sometimes it's lo na'im, it's not comfortable to say no or to tell someone that they've done something wrong. And that doesn't mean it's not the right thing to do. And just as a reminder, Yaakov's life is a reminder that those like very, very delicate, sensitive interactions need to happen carefully with a lot of self-awareness. I would argue also with a lot of guidance from people who know more than we do, who can give us some objective perspectives on what we're about to do. And just, we are still living through the difficulties that were generated by this. And of course, we want to break the cycle as best we can. And God willing, we only have good, easy things to deal with. But knowing that real life is real life and we're going to have some difficult things, we should just go in with our eyes open and hopefully have more success in this realm. Okay, a good Shabbos to everyone. Thanks for being here. Thank you. Thank you. Okay, I see there's a question. What should Yaakov have done? Should he have not listened to his father? Should he have not listened to his mother? It's a great question. It seems like if there was anybody, I don't want to say at fault, but there's a lot more blame put on Rivka than on Yaakov. We'll put it that way. Like, it's almost like he had no choice. Once his mother gave him those instructions, of course he had to listen to her, but maybe she shouldn't have given him those instructions. That seems to be the more complicated. Ida and I had a very good talk about that the other day. Based on oh, it is on the Nitziv. I couldn't remember who Rabbi Lamb was quoting. Nitziv. Oh, amazing. Okay, now we know we need to look up the Nitziv. Okay, everyone. Oh, Susan, thank you. 10 minutes longer, you think? I don't know. I think a lot of people like half an hour, but okay, maybe we'll do
you. It's fine. It's
30 to 1 with an option till 1:10 or 1:15 or something.